the consciousness and the cosmos, a path to one's own inner cosmos, in assistance of a more profound understanding of the current planetary transition. A stimuli that accompanies the pilgrim in his return to his cosmic home, the consciousness and the cosmos. Podcast of Uksim Planetary Service Center. I recalled something I read by Krishnamurti. He wanted us to see reality as truly is, without holding on to our previous ideas, to free ourselves from our assumptions and usual ways of thinking. This meant letting go of everything and facing reality openly, without prejudice or personal feelings. He also talked about emptying ourselves. This was challenging before the transition. It took a lot of effort to shed our usual thoughts so we could experience reality as it truly appears to us. There was a powerful force encouraging us to let go of our rational minds and embrace reality directly. What Daniel Gagliardo thinks of Steiner, Krishnamurti, Paul Branton, and others that contributed for the awakening of human consciousness.
Muy cerca del fin de la polaridad masculina, fueron precursores que a su manera, ¿sí?, sobre todo Krishnamurti y Paul Branton, ¿sí?, estaban intentando generar condiciones, estímulos que fueran concientizados para que rompiéramos las estructuras con las cuales nos habían enseñado como cultura a observar todo, a medir todo.
Daniel Gagliardo says, Krishnamurti, Paul Branton and Blavatsky were all predecessors. That is to say, all those who were connected in time of Theosophy up to the preamble, up to the threshold of Krishnamurti, very close, in fact, to the end of the masculine polarity of the planet, were those who, in their own way, especially Krishnamurti and Paul Branton, were trying to generate conditions, stimuli, that would be made conscious so that we would break the structure with which we had been taught as a culture to observe everything, to measure everything. So when Krishnamurti said emptying, he wasn't talking about mental emptiness. He was talking about removing the useless from the mind and the emotional center. So at that time, it was not about not thinking when it was discussed emptiness, and not feeling when it was discussed stillness. When we spoke of silence, when we spoke of emptiness, of stillness, but of elevated, heightened expressions of thoughts and feelings, the emptiness of the useless, the emptiness of the irregular, the emptiness of the inharmonious, of the imbalanced, that is what they were referring to. So what would an instructor to say today in more precise language to someone who wants to have an experience of equilibrium, of rebalancing his psyche, to elevate his thoughts, to elevate his feelings?
Sino que se trata de poder vivir con pensamientos elevados y sentimientos elevados. Jamás un instructor actual le diría a las personas que no tienen que...
The elevation of thoughts, said Daniel Gagliardo, will lead him to a state of silence, which is not the absence of thoughts, but the presence of the activity of higher thoughts. Higher thought is silence in action. Higher feeling is stillness in action. It is not absence of thought, it is not absence of feeling. It is really quite the opposite. So when Krishnamurti spoke of detachment, of renunciation, he was giving the keys, as was Paul Branton, to the path that we had to begin to take in order to cross the threshold of the planetary transition. Because he said it in many ways, depending on how one translated, that we should not have dogmas or religious, nor should we have teachers. Krishnamurti described the figure of the master as someone who dictates letters to others about how they should live, breathe, and act, whether to stand up with the left foot or the right. He was not opposing the existence of higher order instructors throughout history, such as Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Zoroaster, and Apollonius of Tyana. Instead, he emphasized the importance of not adhering to the techniques, dogmas, or teachers. Krishnamurti believed that the inner development we each possess allow us to transcend the contributions that these figures might offer. If we solely rely on their teachings, we risk falling into inertia and evolutionary stagnation. There are millions of individuals with the potential to have expansive and unprecedented experiences. However, many do not pursue this potential due to inability, fear, inertia, or misguided search for security, leading them to cling to outdated beliefs and practices. Steiner was an inwardly enlightened individual whose inner wisdom guided him. His vision focused on bringing forth activities related to therapy, healing, which many people found to be essential. In essence, he served as a channel within a large spiritual hierarchy, acting as an instructor in his unique way. He facilitated a deeper connection with the energy of healing and therapy, aligning it with both contemporary times and the future. However, as with any teacher, the interpretation of Steiner's teachings by others can lead to confusion or ineffectiveness. Nonetheless, Steiner, along with figures like Bach and others, belong to a group of individuals who are prepared to make significant contributions to humanity's future.
porque él estaba diciendo, y lo decía de muchas maneras, según como se lo traduzca también, ¿no? Que no había que tener dogmas, religiones, no había que tener maestros. Él habla de la figura del maestro como alguien.
Daniel Gagliardo continues, religiosity is an aspect, a consequence of what we have just described. When the being manages to break with his identification, this material hypnotism that up to that moment has bound him, tied him to egoistic, unstable patterns, what he experiences is the recomposition of a relation, of the inner connection. That is to say, he begins to reconnect with the source from which he was temporarily distant due to his identification with the material forces. When a being identifies with matter, it breaks the connection it had with the inner life, and the more it identifies with matter, the less the being is able to connect with the inner life. Thus, colligation is the result of relegation, and the movement of relegation experienced by the consciousness is called the movement of reconnection, correlation, that has nothing to do with religion.
Él estaba hablando de no seguir técnicas, de no seguir dogmas, de no seguir maestros, en función de que la preparación oculta en cada uno de nosotros nos daba márgenes para superar todo el aporte que esos elementos pudieran hacer.
The being experiences religiosity when he can advance in the synthesis of reducing the distance from what he is as ego, in the context of the personality, to what he is vibrationally with the soul. This reduction of distance, that is to say, of the vibratory difference between the ego turned to matter and one's own soul, this reduction of distance is the path, the synthesis towards colligation, and is the path of religiosity. That is to say, of reconnecting the ego to its inner life, to its inner source. At some point, the ego, in certain incarnations, requires minimal efforts to achieve a sense of spiritual connection or religiosity. This occurs because, through the cycles of incarnation and disincarnation, the ego gains gradual and genuine insights into this inner life. In the next incarnation, the efforts and energy needed to consciously connect with its own inner essence become significantly less demanding. It may seem minor at first, but a time will come when being enter the material realm in a very dynamic way. They will do so with minimal energy, aligning themselves to truly experience their presence in matter, with clarity. This means they will understand the purpose of their existence in the material world and recognize the function of being here, essentially fulfilling their mission, or as we call it, inner planning. Religiosity is an aspect that arises as a consequence of this understanding. In everything that life places, there is always a hidden part. What is that hidden part? The cosmic essence that is in every situation, the evolutionary energy with which we should align in every situation, the cosmic essence in every situation, the spiritual laws that begin to be experienced. It means that what we reject in every situation is far more essential and profound than we realize. So, a being can have within his theoretical framework that in life we have to accept what the energy places, because it is the most important thing to evolve. But he can have that only in theory. Until he has a deep love for knowing his inner self, until he has a genuine inner vocation, he cannot, through an intuitive subjective inner experience, understand what is in each situation. We asked Daniel if he could share with us his insights on the genetic modifications that occurred during the time of the Atlanteans, and if the Atlanteans were responsible for the diversity of animal species on the planet. Whether the Atlanteans engaged in practices similar to our current genetic manipulations, if they contributed to the widening the planetary genetic fissure. The genes that comprise the animal and the human kingdoms, along with the other living organisms, are subcodes of the planetary genetic code. This planetary genetic code, in turn, is a subcode of the solar genetic code, which encompasses the entire solar system. Daniel Gagliardo says, not necessarily, because we cannot attribute the immense diversity of species presented on the planet to the genetic modifications made by the Atlanteans. While they are responsible for some degree of inherent diversity and multiplicity, they are not entirely responsible for it. The variety of states of consciousness among different species, including animals, plants, and even minerals, although the word minerals is typically referred to as species. The manipulation performed by the Atlanteans was specific to certain species, but this represents only a small percentage of the overall diversity and does not exempt it from a degree of toxicity. This toxicity, however, arises because any form of genetic manipulation alters the overall genetic pattern. When the Atlanteans in their time did what they did, and what we have been doing for some time now, in terms of genetic manipulation, all kinds of genetic manipulation, what they did and what we did what we continue to do was widen the planetary genetic fissure. Because the genes that make up the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, the genes presented under all aspects, are genetic subcodes of the planetary genetic code, which in turns is a genetic subcode of the solar genetic code, that is to say, of the solar system. Each planet has a specific subcode of the system, and we are going to discover that the genetic code of a solar system is a galactic genetic subcode. Therefore, because of the hidden laws of magnetic vibrational creation of some sort, give the process of genesis and the genetic relationship between elements. So when the Atlanteans did what they did, and we continue with the line, science does not relate it to what was done with the Atlanteans, because for science, the Atlanteans are part of the esoteric, hidden, mystical folklore. But beyond what they consider, what they did, the Atlanteans, and what we continue doing is destroying the genetic code. In other words, a growing gap is forming that prevents energy from adequately supporting the various elements of our planetary reality. Many individuals feeling disconnected from their inner essence feel suffocating. For energy to flow properly within a system such as our universe, there should not be significant fissures or disruptions. Our humanity generated the conditions that we created within a specific stage, within the context of a broader evolutionary cycle, which led us to a turning point. We could have taken another path. Not all karmic civilizations in the cosmos take the path that we took. It is exclusively our responsibility as a planetary race to generate what we have achieved so far.